Hello everyone, my name is Jason and today I want to talk to you about Terminator Dark Fate. Terminator Dark Fate is the third entry into the Terminator series. No, not that one. Not that one either. And definitely not that one. Alright, there's been a lot of attempts to make a Terminator 3. This is, again, an attempt to make Terminator 3. Completely undoes the other films after Terminator 2, and this movie picks up immediately after Terminator 2 ends. Originally, my idea for this segment was to talk about stupid things in particular scenes of movies, which you can see in my previous video. But having just seen the latest entry into the Terminator series, I've decided that one scene is just not going to cut it with this one. So instead, here's my review. If you want the short version of this review, this movie sucks. Anyway, if you want to hear the rest of the review, expect some spoilers and let's get into it. So when I heard that a new Terminator movie was coming out with the largely original cast returning to it, and it was being directed by Tim Miller, who directed Deadpool, I was excited. It goes without saying that the Terminator franchise took a major nosedive after Terminator 2. Tim Miller directed Deadpool, and I'm not a huge fan of Deadpool, but that's mostly of the character. I thought the movie itself was well made, and obviously it did exceedingly well. And of course, having a Terminator film with Linda Hamilton reprising her role as Sarah Connor seemed really intriguing and interesting to me, since we haven't seen her since Terminator 2. They tried to put the character back in Terminator Genisys, but it was nothing like the Sarah Connor that we've seen in Terminator 1 and Terminator 2. And that movie is just its own horrible movie on its own. I don't even want to get into that one because I'll take a major veer off talking about how bad that movie is. But we really haven't seen these characters come back since Terminator 2. So we've got the original cast back. We've got James Cameron buying the franchise back. Arnold's back. Linda Hamilton's back. It's got a good director. So it seemed like this could be a good movie. Going into it, I wasn't expecting this to be as good as Terminator 2. You're going to hear a lot of me comparing this movie to Terminator 2 and comparing it to Terminator 1, and that sounds kind of counterintuitive to what I'm saying right now, but they make good comparisons. There's reasons that those two movies worked and this one didn't, but I wasn't expecting Terminator Dark Fate to be Terminator 2. I was hoping it would be a good sequel to the movie, but I was never expecting it to be on par. Now, look, Terminator 2 was an amazing film for a lot of reasons, and no one would have expected at that time that what would be viewed today as kind of a big, dumb sci-fi action blockbuster coming out to be an incredibly well-made, amazingly written, deep, and emotional film. Terminator 2 is a masterpiece of cinema, and there's reasons that it's considered one of the best films ever made. It's one of the greatest examples all time of the elusive sequel that's better than the original. There's not many of those out there, but this is pretty much always the front runner in that. Again, though, my expectation for this film, for Dark Fate, was never that it was going to be that same lightning striking twice, nor would it really need to. Sequels don't always need to do what the original did better. I think of the Back to the Future series in this case. So while you can debate whether or not the first or the second one is better, I've heard that kind of go both ways. It's pretty much unanimously agreed upon, though, that Part 3 is the weakest in that franchise. That's my view for sure. But that doesn't mean that I dislike Part 3. It doesn't mean that there's times I haven't wanted to watch Part 3. It's still a good movie. It holds the spirit of the originals, and it feels like it's a part of that universe. It feels like it's a necessary portion. I mean, it really is the way Back to the Future was made. But it's necessary in that trilogy. That piece of the movie needs to be there. But it's still a fun movie. I like the movie. It's nowhere near as good as the other two, but it's still a lot of fun. Same thing can be said about Indiana Jones. I'm not going to talk about Part 4, but if you talk about the original three, Raiders, Temple of Doom, and Last Crusade, again, a lot of debate between Last Crusade and Raiders being the better of the bunch, but again, usually unanimously decided that Temple of Doom is the worst one. And again, I think that is. I think it's the furthest from what the expectation of an Indiana Jones movie would be, but I still love it. It's still a really great movie, and there's plenty of times that I just go back to watch Temple of Doom if I want to watch an Indiana Jones movie. It's fun, and that's what a sequel could be. It doesn't need to outdo what the other ones did. It just needs to feel like it's a part of that universe and has a place in it. And oh boy, this movie, while I was hoping for it, I did not get that whatsoever. So where do we begin with the reasons that this movie doesn't work? Well, to start, let me get this out of the way. I think it's really a shame how much I dislike this movie because there's really a lot of great things in it. There's a lot of really good effects work, and there's a lot of cool ideas in the movie. but they just largely don't come together. The new Terminator itself is really interesting and has some cool stuff going for it. There was a lot of cool things that it did, a lot of things similar to like the T-1000 and Terminator 2, like how there's one scene that he kind of just walks through one of the median girders on a highway, because he just can. He's kind of like that liquid metal kind of thing going on. There's a lot of quick little things that happen, and you look at it and you're like, oh, that's neat. It's cool little fun things that they made this Terminator do. He kind of like melts through the bottom of a truck, like he gets hit by a truck, and then he's on the road under it and kind of seeps his way inside to take over the driver's seat while someone's trying to check on him. Again, it's cool stuff. There's cool stuff that happens in it. It's got some really cool ideas that harken to some of the cool ideas that were in Terminator 2, but there's just not enough of them in the movie to outweigh the bad of this movie. So I think where I should really start to talk about what works and what doesn't work is the new characters, and sadly the reason that they didn't work. I'm gonna compare this to Star Wars, The Force Awakens, because Terminator Dark Fate is really an attempt to reboot the Terminator franchise. It's not just playing Terminator 3, it's really playing, okay, this is the start of a whole new thing. It's actually part of the story. It's a different war that happens. What happened in Terminator 2 worked. They stopped Skynet, and now there's this new thing that just happens to have the same plan and makes Terminators, and they're a little bit different. Again, it's cool because it kind of explains some things, like why wouldn't they have just sent this far superior Terminator model to kill John Connor? Well, it's because it's not Skynet trying to do it. They don't even know who John Connor is. It's a whole new universe, so it's really a reboot. So I want to compare this to The Force Awakens because The Force Awakens is also kind of a soft reboot for the Star Wars franchise. It's widely agreed upon. But both these movies kind of did the same thing, and it's actually a smart move to allow the viewer to kind of accept this new universe and accept these new characters. It kind of forces you to. I remember when Star Wars The Force Awakens was coming out, I was really excited to see Han Solo and Luke Skywalker, all my familiar original trilogy things. And regardless of how you feel about the sequels for Star Wars, that's not what I'm here to talk about. The movie itself was well received, and it did some really good things. What it really did very well was it forces you to know these characters and to feel connected to these characters before it does anything that you're familiar with. So by that I mean in Star Wars, we went about 30 minutes into the movie before we got something that we had prior connection to. I mean, there were things we were familiar with, like there were stormtroopers, but they were different stormtroopers. They weren't the same stormtroopers we knew, but we could recognize, hey, that's a stormtrooper. And there were Star Destroyers, but again, it was different. It was like, hey, that's a Star Destroyer, but it's different than the one we knew. It wasn't that original trilogy kind of thing. And we met all new characters who are familiar to the character archetypes that we knew, but they were different. About 30 minutes into the movie, the Millennium Falcon pops up. We get our first real, hey, this was something that you've seen. This is something you're connected to. This is something that you wholeheartedly know. It's not a different version of it. It's that thing that you liked and that made you excited. And then about 15 minutes after that, we get our first character that we knew from the original movies, which was Han Solo. He shows up with Chewie. And then it sprinkles in more and more as the movie goes on. Eventually we see 3PO and Leia. We eventually see R2. We eventually see Darth Vader's helmet. We eventually see Luke Skywalker. All these things got added in little by little. And the reason that was done was because we had time to meet these new characters, to meet Rey, to meet Finn, to meet Poe, and to like these characters. Because again, these characters were ideally going to take over this franchise. So if the movie just started out and we immediately got all the things that we knew from the originals, and we got Luke Skywalker and Han Solo and the Millennium Falcon right from the start of the movie, we're not going to appreciate the new characters because we just want to see them more. That's what we were told. Hey, this is going to be a movie about those original characters again, and that's what we would have wanted to see. But no, the movie instead told us, hey, this movie is going to follow these 3 or 4 people, but there's going to be support along the way. And eventually that support will get backed out a little bit more and more. And that's a good way to do your reboot. gives the viewer no choice. And for me, it worked. I ended up liking Rey. I ended up liking Finn. I ended up liking Poe. I ended up liking Kylo Ren. And I wasn't waiting to see the original characters anymore. By the time we saw one, I was excited and I was happy to see them. I was excited to see the Millennium Falcon. I was excited to see Han Solo. But I wasn't going through every scene thinking to myself, man, I really just want to see my original characters. I enjoyed these new characters enough that they kept me entertained. So going back into Terminator, this movie tries to do the same thing. To their credit, it doesn't just start out, well, actually, let me take that back. So again, going into spoilers here, it starts out with, for whatever reason, a flashback to Terminator 2 of Linda Hamilton's videotape of her talking about Judgment Day being real. That was probably the best part of the movie because it was a little bit of Terminator 2, but that's that's during the opening title cards and everything. It's giving her speech again. And then we're treated to a scene, which I think is actually an interesting scene, where Sarah Connor and John Connor, a very de-aged Linda Hamilton, computer graphic de-aged Linda Hamilton, and a very computer graphic John Connor are somewhere in the Caribbean on a beach or something somewhere. And a T-800 CG Arnold Schwarzenegger Terminator finds them and kills John Connor. If it finally happens, John Connor gets killed right at the beginning of the movie. And I thought that was an interesting way to start the movie, because forever, John Connor can't die. That's what we know. We have to have John Connor. So the movie literally kills off one of the biggest characters in the franchise within the first 2 minutes of the movie. So it was an interesting way to start. It actually got my attention, and I thought it was cool. And then the movie starts after that. It flash forwards 22 years later, so it's modern day, and we're introduced to our new characters. We're introduced to the new target, essentially the new Sarah Connor. We're shortly introduced to the new Terminator and this girl who's sent back to protect the new target. I'm sorry, their names escape me right now. But we have a bunch of scenes with them first, right? We know that Linda Hamilton's in the movie. We know Arnold Schwarzenegger's in the movie because it's been all over the trailer. But we go about the same amount of time. We go about 30 minutes before we see Linda Hamilton show back up, except for the bit in the beginning with the Terminator killing John Connor. So it gives us that same chance to grow with the characters. And while in The Force Awakens, I stopped thinking about wanting to see the old characters again, I found myself in this movie, the longer it was going on, wanting to see the old characters again. I was getting tired of these new characters. They just weren't doing it for me. These characters didn't feel fun and entertaining to watch, really. I just kept thinking, okay, when am I going to see Arnold Schwarzenegger as the Terminator? That's what I want to see now. I've had enough of this. I want to see Arnold Schwarzenegger. It wasn't that bad at first. I was okay. By the time they finally showed Linda Hamilton, I wasn't feeling that way. But then she enters into the movie. Some more stuff happens. I don't even know for how long, but eventually I'm just like, okay, let's just get to Arnold. I want to see my original Terminator back now. I'm not feeling these characters. I want to feel connected back to Terminator again. And that is a lousy feeling to feel in a movie that's largely trying to be a reboot. Right there, that's a warning sign that this movie is not working, because it's not allowing me to feel what you want me to feel, which is excited for these new characters. It's not to say that the performances of the characters were bad. It's just something about them didn't feel right. Like I said before, Gabriel Luna as the new Terminator did very, very well. I think Mackenzie Davis also did really well. I just didn't like their characters that much. And I'll go into that in a little bit why, mostly with Gabriel Luna's Terminator character, because I'm going to discuss a different part. But Mackenzie Davis's character I don't know, it just didn't work for me. She just didn't feel like a very interesting character. She was kind of this human Terminator crossbreed. She was an enhanced human being, and it just kind of felt cheap. Almost like you don't want the hero of the movie, the helper, to be another Terminator, because we've seen that before. And you don't want it to be another human, because we've seen it before, so you're going to kind of blend the two. And it's just something about it. It seemed like a cool concept, but it didn't feel right. It felt like someone playing a Terminator video game with a cheat code turned on. She just felt like a person, but she can kind of magically do whatever she needed to in a situation to make it all okay. Gabriel Luna's Terminator, again, he didn't do anything wrong. It's just there were things that didn't ground it to reality to make it memorable or make it intimidating. So with him, he would be most comparable to Robert Patrick playing the T-1000. His Terminator is very similar. Again, it's a cool idea for a Terminator. It's a regular like Terminator endoskeleton with this kind of liquidy metal one on top of it, and the two of them can separate. So it's kind of like two separate Terminators. You kind of see it in the trailer a couple of times. Again, it's a neat idea. The thing is, it didn't work as well as the T-1000, and the reason for that, again, goes into how well made Terminator 2 is. Terminator 2 is all about little details and world building and character building. And again, I'm going to go into this in a little bit, but in Terminator 2, when the T-1000 kind of turns into his liquid state, it's, this shiny liquid metal looking thing. It's what you would expect something that's liquid metal to look like. So your brain connects to it. You can comprehend what you're seeing when he melts and reforms, or when he forms weapons out of his hands and stuff like that. The knife, his hand will turn into the shape of a knife more and more until it's just a blade. You can understand what's happening. It's something to link to, something tangible, something so you have a connection to it, and that makes it scary and intimidating. Hey, this seemingly person, this seemingly human being suddenly is turning his hand into a knife, or making himself look like another person. You'll see him turn into a liquid state first, and then kind of morph into the shape of the person he's copying, and then have this kind of skin overlay on top of him, and you see the whole effect. But again, the whole time you're understanding, okay, he is shedding that kind of fake skin look. He's in his liquid state. He's morphing. He's metal, and he's solidifying and becoming a human being. So you feel grounded to it. In this one, in Dark Fate, with Gabriel Luna's version of this same kind of deal, it's not anything your brain can really connect to. I don't really understand what he is. It's not even really told to us. I mean, in Terminator 2, it's explained to us, hey, he's liquid metal. Arnold Schwarzenegger says it to John Connor.
Hemimetic polyalloy.
What the hell does that mean?
Liquid metal.
So we're told in the movie, hey, he's liquid metal, but we've already figured that out. We can tell what he is just because we can see it and our brain processes it. The effect looks like liquid metal and we understand it. In this movie, he can turn into this kind of black ooze kind of stuff, and I don't know what that's supposed to be. I don't know if he's made out of some kind of black metal that can turn into liquid. I don't know. I just don't know. I don't know what it is. It's never told to us what it is because our characters don't know, which is part of the plot. Like I said, it's a different future, so it's not like Arnold Schwarzenegger's Terminator is familiar with him. He doesn't know what he's made out of or what he is. The Mackenzie Davis character never really explains what he is. They explain, what his designation number is, and that you don't mess with it, you just run from it. But we don't know what it is. My brain can't comprehend what's happening with it. It has some cool looking effects, and you've seen some of it in the trailer where he grabs onto this like pole that they throw at him, and he separates from his endoskeleton part, and it's in this kind of funky design. Like, it's not a fluid looking thing like the T-1000 was. It's jaggedy looking and in interesting shapes, and then it forms into him. So it's the same idea as the T-1000, but I don't know what it's supposed to be. I don't know if he's liquid metal. I don't know if he's some kind of slime, oil, or if it's just dirty metal. I mean, I don't know what it is. My brain can't understand it and comprehend it because it's not anything I'm familiar with. So as a result of that, this character is less intimidating to me because I understand what's going on with the T-1000. My brain understands that this shouldn't be possible because this guy looks like a human being, and now he looks like metal, and now he looks like something else. Whereas with this guy, it's just kind of like, all right, he looks like a human being, and now he's some black stuff, and he made a knife out of the black stuff, and I don't know what that knife is made out of. I mean, obviously it's dangerous. We see it cut, and it's a knife, but it's not grounded in that reality, which is a silly thing to say in a movie about robots that disguise themselves as human beings that jump back in time to kill people to change the future. It's a stupid and weird thing to say with that kind of a plot, that something's not grounded in reality, but that's what makes the first two movies work on a level. It's part of what makes the first two movies work anyway, is that the things that are supposed to be intimidating and are supposed to be dangerous, the things that are supposed to make you revel in what's happening, is something that you understand and you're familiar with. Everyone who saw Terminator knows what a robot is. Everyone who saw Terminator 2 understood that it was a liquid metal and a new kind of threat. You can comprehend it. Your brain has something tangible to attach itself to and something it's familiar with, because it's close enough to reality. Maybe far off perceived reality, but it's something that I can envision being a thing in the future. Whereas this new one, I just don't understand what it is or how it works, what it's made out of, or what it's doing. It's just really hard to comprehend it. So that's, to me, why the new Terminator character fell short. And then Natalia Reyes plays the new target. I think her name is Danny. I don't remember. Like I said, I'm not good with character names, and these ones weren't all that memorable to begin with. So I think her name is Danny. She's essentially the new Sarah Connor. This character I hate. I hated this character. It wasn't so bad at first, but there's a point in the movie where she learns what she's going to be, which is essentially she's going to be the hero for all mankind. She's essentially going to be the John Connor of the future. And this character goes from being this confused and scared woman, kind of like Sarah Connor is at the beginning of the first Terminator movie, to just at one point in the movie, she's instantly like this great leader and inspiring hope in everyone, and coming up with the plans and saying, no, we're going to do this. I'm not running anymore. And those aren't necessarily bad things, but the way it happens and how fast it happens is uncharacteristically fast with everything we've seen about the character already. It's literally just a switch goes off and she's a totally different person. And it just feels super forced. It feels rammed down my neck and down my throat as to who she is and how great she's going to be in the future, that it comes off as not believable. I don't like the character, because you're telling me all of this stuff about this person, which we don't see, and then all of a sudden, once she finds that out, she's all those things. And again, to compare it to the first movies, that's kind of the same thing that happens with Sarah Connor. She's not going to be the John Connor. She's not going to be the savior of humanity. She knows her son is, and she changes her character. In Terminator 1, she's scared. She has no idea what's going on, and she stays that way the entire movie.
Your world is pretty terrifying.
Really, up until like the last couple of minutes of the movie. Kyle Reese dies. She still doesn't know what she's doing. She's still obviously afraid. She manages to kill this Terminator. She becomes a strong individual throughout the movie. And then in Terminator 2, we've seen what she's turned into because of her experience, because she has no choice. But it took her 2 movies to get there. And it took the entirety of a movie on screen for her to get there, and she wasn't even fully there. So for all of a sudden, this character just to be kind of acting that way, it seems really forced, and it doesn't seem like a person. Sarah Connor felt like a person. Sarah Connor felt like someone who was afraid, who didn't know what to do, and was being hunted. This character just seems like someone who's along for a ride and decides, okay, I'm going to just step it up, and this is what I'm going to do now. And it just feels really, really forced. And in a movie and in a movie series all about robots disguising themselves as people and trying to kill other people, this character to me felt like the most inhuman character out of anybody. I didn't believe that this was a human being watching this movie. It seemed like a machine trying to act like a human being. I just did not like this character. It's nothing against Natalia Reyes. I don't know. I don't think it's necessarily how she played the character. I just think it's how the character was written. I just did not like this character. I felt the character was obnoxious and just kind of forced down my throat. Did not like her, again, mostly stemming from the fact that we had already in place an archetype of how to do the character they wanted her to be with Sarah Connor, a character already in these movies, and it fell completely flat of it. It felt just extremely rushed and unbelievable. So I did not like this character at all. And that's really it for our characters. We don't have a lot of other characters in this movie. There's some side characters, and that's fine. It doesn't need more characters. There's not a lot of characters in the first movies. But that's all we really have to go with. We have Natalia Reyes, who is essentially responsible for projecting our plot forward. She's the focus of the movie, and her character is just not good. We have Mackenzie Davis, who's tasked to keep her safe, and it's an interesting idea, and she, again, doesn't play it bad. It's just her character is not all that interesting. And then we have Gabriel Luna, who does a great job playing the Terminator, but it's just not a Terminator I'm connecting with. And going back into the T-1000, if they didn't want me to compare it to the T-1000, they wouldn't make it like the T-1000. They did the same thing in Terminator 3 with the TX or whatever it was called. It was the woman who can change the size of her breasts for whatever reason. It was the same idea. It was a liquid metal thing with an endoskeleton underneath. But the idea, of course, was to make you think of the T-1000 because everyone loves the T-1000. And they should, because the T-1000 was an awesome villain. But both of these Terminators are meant to harken back to it and behave similar to it and to make you be like, that's cool. I remember that good old T-1000 from that good Terminator movie. And this character's like that one, except it's not, because it's just like that on the outside in appearance with its ability to do the liquidy metal stuff. But it doesn't feel like the T-1000. It doesn't feel as threatening or as troubling. It doesn't feel like a machine as much as the T-1000 felt like. And that's where a lot of the problems with this movie lay. And it's where a lot of the problems with all the Terminator movies after the first two lay, which is the sequels that are being made don't quite understand what made the first two Terminator movies good. The first two Terminator movies, especially the first one, weren't just action blockbuster movies. They had a very strong horror element to them. Again, more so in the first one than the second one, but the first one was really like horror sci-fi, and the second one was like an action horror sci-fi. There's not a lot of huge action set pieces in the two movies. Again, I know there's more in Terminator 2, and they're really great. They're great action set pieces, but they're a lot smaller in scale than what we're getting in these newer Terminator movies. But a large part of what makes them really good is the horror element behind them. Obviously, it's not like, Child's Play or Nightmare on Elm Street kind of horror, but it's the Terminator itself is a scary character. It's this unrelenting, unstoppable force that's set out to do one thing, which is to kill this person. And nothing will stop it from doing that. And that's like any horror movie you see. If you watch a Halloween movie, Michael Myers is setting out to kill something, and nothing can stop it. It's seemingly unstoppable. Jason in Friday the 13th is seemingly unstoppable. Freddy Krueger, seemingly unstoppable. You just have this force that you don't know how to deal with.
He'll find her. That's what he does. That's all he does. You can't stop him. He'll wait for you, reach down her throat, and pull her fucking heart out.
And that's exactly what the Terminator movies are. You have this machine that you don't know how to deal with. You don't know how to stop it, and it's never going to stop because it doesn't need to. It's a machine. And that's what made them really interesting. And in Terminator 2, this is really amplified with the T-1000 especially. But in both of those movies, there is such great attention to detail and such great ability to make you believe that these are machines, which is what adds the troubling aspect behind them and makes you fear more and makes you feel more connected to the threat that's being presented in the movie. In Terminator 2, Robert Patrick studied insects and insect movements a lot to kind of figure out how to move in the movie, because it gives him this kind of inhuman quality. And it works really well. It's a lot of subtle things, but his mannerisms are very just inhuman. Like he moves around weird. He touches things oddly. He's kind of like an alien in a human skin.
You okay? Fine. Say, that's a nice bike.
He doesn't exactly know how to behave. He knows what human beings do and like how they talk, but doesn't understand the reasons and the why to the way that they move and talk, and the reasons why they behave the way they do, because he's a machine. He's not going to understand those reasons. He's not meant to. But that reflects in his character throughout the whole movie. There's just always something off about him. And we all know how Terminator 2 went, with the T-1000 being the bad guy and the T-800, which was Arnold Schwarzenegger, being the good guy, which was different than the first movie. And it was completely spoiled in the trailer, unfortunately. But there's a lot of subtle things in the movie that kind of tell you right at the start that this is going to be your bad guy. In the beginning of Terminator 2, we see the war in the future, and all the machines, when they're on the screen and they're killing everyone, it has this music track playing in it. And then the next time we hear it is when we see the T-1000. So that music's kind of already associated with these are the bad guys. We don't know that for sure yet, but it's associated with them once. The only other time we saw it is when the machines are killing a bunch of people, and now it's just kind of a few notes of it subtly play in the background when we see the T-1000. So we're not explicitly told yet that the T-1000 is the bad guy, but these little cues are there to tell us this is the bad guy. Something's off. In the first Terminator movie, the same thing happens with Arnold Schwarzenegger. He when he's looking around, he just kind of moves his eyes instead of his whole head. You know, a human being would just kind of move their head from side to side, but he scans with his eyes first and then moves his head when he has to. And again, this was a creative decision because that would be conserving energy, and then it would just be more efficient. There's just a lot of little things like that throughout the movie. I mean, even going as far as training Robert Patrick and Arnold Schwarzenegger not to blink when they're firing the guns, which had to have been hard to do because obviously they're not firing real guns, but they're firing blanks and it's still going off. So they trained these guys to not blink their eyes while firing because they're machines. So there's lots of little subtleties put into these characters that make you believe that this is not a human being. It looks like a human being, but it's not a human being. And with the Terminator in this movie, despite how well Gabriel Luna does and kind of exhibits that same, he can be really nice when he's trying to get what he wants because, that's his cover, and like this charming kind of person, just like we got with the T-1000 when he needs to be. At no point did I ever really feel like he does anything that makes me feel like he's anything other than just a really deranged human being, unless there's special effects going on around him that show me that he's a machine. And in the context of a movie, that I guess it makes sense because obviously they want these things to be as close to human as possible to blend in. So I get that, but I don't really feel like that was the intention. I don't think they had that in mind. And you kind of got to break out of that because the audience itself is more important to make believe that these are a machine and not a human being. I need, as an audience member, to really believe, and you need to sell to me that this is not a person. And at no point did I ever feel that. There's nothing intimidating about him other than this kind of mean mug he makes every once in a while. He just kind of has a deadpan expression on his face. There's nothing in there that makes me say, okay, this guy's a robot and not a sociopath. It just doesn't pull off the same way that the T-1000 did. And again, if you don't want me to compare this one to the T-1000, then don't make it act and look like the T-1000. Give it a different thing. Give it a different effect. Let it be something different. But other than having an endoskeleton underneath that it can separate from, this is a T-1000 again. It's just not as cool of a one, and it's not one that I can really understand and comprehend the physics of enough to make me believe that this is a real thing. And that's problematic. And that's a big problem, again, with every Terminator movie after the first two. The movies try so hard to one-up the action that we got in Terminator 2, which is a hard feat to do on its own, but it takes you out of the movie. There's nothing that happens in Terminator 1, especially, that really is a giant set piece. The biggest thing that probably happens is the shootout in the police station. He breaks in, he rams a car into a desk so he can get inside, and then murders everyone inside. That's like your biggest action set piece in that entire movie. Terminator 1 is actually a very slow-paced, character-driven story with this looming threat the entire time hunting them. And that's that horror element of the movie. You're meant to be afraid of this thing catching you. Terminator 2 amped it up, and it does the same thing. Again, an incredible performance from Robert Patrick really sells you that this is not a human being that's hunting John Connor, and the only thing that can keep John Connor safe is the very thing that we were afraid of in the last movie. Now, there's a lot bigger action set pieces in this movie. I mean, they blow up a part of a building. There's a big truck chase in it and everything. There's a lot more action set pieces in it, but it's still nothing that is really out of the realm of possibility in my mind. These things are all kind of self-contained and on a smaller scale. A good way to kind of compare the two, again, is with this truck chase. So in the trailer, you've seen part of it, but there's this big truck chase that happens very early in the start of the movie, where our heroes are in a car and they're trying to drive away from the new Terminator in this giant truck, and they're all over a highway, and it's all cut super, super fast. And there's a lot of people getting in accidents. They're crashing into other people. There's explosions, and it's very fast paced. The camera is literally just cutting from one shot to the other. It's hard to follow. It's not fun to follow. I've found myself watching this scene just wondering what the hell is happening right now. This is all coming at me so quickly that I can't pay attention to a single part of it, and there's no tension behind it. And then you take a similar scene in Terminator 2 where the T-1000's chasing after John Connor. John Connor is on his little dirt bike. The T-1000 gets in a truck and starts chasing him down on that. And at first they're on a street and they hit a couple of cars, but then the movie contains this action piece into one of the aqueducts off the highway. And it's just John and it's just this truck, and it's a tense scene. It's a really great action scene, but it's tense because you're focusing on just the two of them. There's not quick cuts. There's not just jumping around all over the place. It's focusing on the threat, and it's focusing on John's reaction to the threat. And then it cuts to Arnold on the bike trying to get there. And it's happening in a slow enough pace that you can comprehend it, that you understand where everyone is in relation to everything else, and it gives you a chance to feel the tension in this scene. You really worry that this thing is going to kill John. You know in the back of your mind it's not going to, because we're still only like a third into the movie. It's still relatively the beginning of the movie, so they're obviously not going to kill your main character off right away. But the threat is there, and it does a good enough job of presenting that threat that it's tense, and you really worry about it the whole time. This doesn't have that feeling behind it. This is just two superhuman beings duking it out on a highway, and then Linda Hamilton pulls in and blows one up with a bazooka. And that's not the same kind of thing. That has no tension behind it. That's just all action and adrenaline, which can be a good thing in movies, but not in a Terminator movie. Because what made the good Terminator movies was the tension and the suspense and the fear behind the action. And this movie just doesn't bring that to the forefront. And it's really a shame. Because, again, there's really cool stuff that would work for that. The effect of this new Terminator would work for that if you can explain to me what it is. If I can feel connected to it. And if you can slow it down so that I can actually feel the tension. I don't have time to feel any tension in that scene because it's all over the place. I can't even see it before it cuts to the next spot. So basically, summing all of that up, these sequels don't follow what the first two movies set, which is that in addition to being an action movie, first and foremost, these movies need to be a tense horror type of movie. And both Arnold Schwarzenegger and Robert Patrick put so much into those characters to make that believable and to make them scary. And I don't feel that in this movie. Now, does this do things as badly as the other Terminator movies do? No, for largely the most part, no. This is definitely far better than Terminator Salvation. Terminator Salvation takes place in the future, and it didn't look anything like the future that we saw in the other Terminator movies. I don't know what Terminator Salvation was. I just largely ignore it. But it was definitely more akin to being a Terminator movie than Terminator Salvation was. It was way better than Terminator Genisys. Terminator Genisys, in my opinion, was one of the worst things I've ever seen. This was way better than that. It felt more like a Terminator movie than Terminator Genisys felt. But that doesn't make it a good movie. Was this better than Terminator 3 is where things start to get interesting for me. I feel like Terminator 3 was not good. But Terminator 3 suffers because, again, it didn't really do the things a Terminator movie does to make them good, just like I was explaining before. But Terminator 3 felt self-aware. Terminator 3 felt like a parody of a Terminator movie, and it was bad and it was stupid, but I had fun watching it. If Terminator 3 is on TV and I can't really find anything to watch, I'll watch it. Every once in a while I have an inkling or desire to watch the movie because it's dumb fun. And it's presented in a way that's telling you right from the start that this movie is going to be dumb fun. It does not hide that fact. As I mentioned earlier, the first thing we see from the TX, which is the villain in that movie, she gets in the car, looks at a billboard, and decides her breasts are too small and makes them bigger. We see Arnold Schwarzenegger put on like a pair of Elton John sunglasses and tell someone to talk to the hand. This movie knows what it is.
Talk to the hand.
This movie knows it's stupid as hell, and it just embraces it, and it has fun doing it. As a result, it doesn't really feel like a Terminator movie. It has some moments in it where you have the two Terminators duking it out, which I think are really cool to watch. I actually think those fight scenes were a little bit more fun than some of the fight scenes I saw in this movie. But it's aware. It's self-aware that it's a dumb movie, and it just has fun with that fact. And as a result, I have more fun watching it because I am already told right at the start, okay, turn my brain off. Don't watch this like you watch the other Terminator movies. This is just going to be stupid. And to give it its full credit, the end of Terminator 3 is fantastic. I love the end of Terminator 3. I think it was a really awesome ending, and I think it was a good way to kind of get around them ending Judgment Day in Terminator 2. I thought it was clever, and I really liked where they went with the end of that movie. And by the end, I really do mean like the last 5 minutes of the movie. That's the only part of the movie I think was good. The rest of the movie, it was just stupid. It still had clever ideas, like the Terminators decided to forget trying to kill John Connor. They don't know where he is anymore. They failed in that, so let's just kill his generals. Like, it had some cool ideas behind it. It was just made stupidly, and it was a stupid movie, but it was a fun movie to watch. This movie tries to be a real Terminator movie. It tries to feel like a Terminator movie, and it presents itself in a way to say, don't turn your brain off. This is not a dumb fun movie. This is a Terminator sequel. And as a result, I feel worse watching it. I didn't have as much fun watching it because this is supposed to be the end-all, be-all Terminator 3. This is supposed to be where the story really goes. Our cast is back. Linda Hamilton is back. James Cameron owns the franchise again. Like, this was it. This was the shot to really say, okay, here's a legitimate sequel. Here's a legitimate third entry into the Terminator movies. And it doesn't feel like it. It just doesn't feel like that kind of a movie. And as a result, I think it's actually worse than Terminator 3. I don't think it's as badly made as Terminator 3. I think it has better performances than Terminator 3. I think it has cooler ideas than Terminator 3. But I didn't enjoy watching it as much. It's obviously been a long time, so I can't imagine exactly how I felt or remember exactly how I felt when I came out of watching Terminator 3. But I remember leaving the theater with my dad after watching Terminator 3, and we were talking about the things we liked in the movie. I had fun watching the movie. I knew it was bad. Like, I came out, and I remember feeling like that was a bad Terminator movie. But I still had fun watching it. I had fun talking about it. I talked to friends a couple of days after it. It was entertaining. I came out of this movie tonight, and I just did not like it. I came out of this movie thinking I hated this movie. It wasn't fun. It wasn't a pleasant experience, and that's just really, really a shame. It just doesn't work. And again, it largely in part because it doesn't follow the same things that Terminator movies follow. And I want to touch quickly on, again, because I forgot about this, the Danny character, the new Sarah Connor, played by Natalia Reyes. There's a segment close to the end of the movie, probably end of the second act, if I remember right, or beginning of the third act, where it shows her being the John Connor kind of archetype character. She's in the future, and she's giving this whole rallying speech, and you're supposed to be impressed with this character and see who she turns into and becomes and why she's so important. And right there, to me, is another reason that this movie doesn't understand what makes a Terminator movie good. We're not supposed to see that stuff. Again, that's part of what makes the Terminator movies scary. We're shown the future, but we're not shown it from a hopeful side ever. We're shown the horror behind it, how terrible this place is. Just people eating rats, people dying nonstop, people trying to fight machines and just getting destroyed. There's no hopeful moments at all in the future moments, in the future scenes in the first two Terminator movies. They do not exist. And everything we know about John Connor is told to us by Kyle Reese and Sarah Connor. And typically in a movie, the idea is show, don't tell. But for this character, it's the opposite of that makes it work, because we're supposed to just believe that John Connor is going to be the last hope for humanity, because that's what Sarah has to believe. That's what's propelling her character forward. So we're seeing her accept that, and we're seeing her character evolve by being given that information without having to see it ourselves. And when you think back to the first two Terminator movies, the only time that we see John Connor, we don't see him whatsoever in the first movie at all. We just hear of him. So we have no idea who he is in the first movie whatsoever, and that movie works. And in the second movie, other than seeing him as a child, we only see the future John Connor for like 30 seconds. He's looking through a pair of binoculars, takes them down, and he's got a scar on his face. And that's it. That's all we get of John Connor. That's what we're told. We're told this guy right here, this dude with the scar looking in the binoculars, that is the last hope for humanity. We need to keep this guy alive. And that's it. That's all we're shown. And that's enough for me. That's enough for the viewer, because we know this is going to happen. We know that this man is important enough that time-traveling robots are trying to kill him and his mother to stop him from becoming that man. You don't need to prove it to me. You don't need to show me a scene of him giving this rallying speech and war cry and getting humanity back together, because we already know that's the whole point. That's the plot of the movie. The machines are trying to stop that from happening by killing this person. So don't show me that. Let me believe that it's going to happen in the future, but not know how or even understand why. Why is a 12-year-old boy going to be so important to the survival of humanity? I don't know. But I just know that he's going to turn into some guy with a scar and binoculars and save the world. This movie does the opposite of that and doesn't let me believe that this girl is going to do that. It has to show me her do it, and it cheapens the character. It's, again, something that they don't get that made the first two movies work, and as a result makes this movie not work. Now, having said that, to give credit where credit is due, I think Arnold Schwarzenegger did a fantastic job in this movie. He still felt like the Terminator. in his own way. But this is a very different Terminator than we've ever seen before. It kind of plays off the idea of the Terminator 2 Terminator, where it was learning to become human, but whereas that took place over a couple of days, this Terminator has been hanging around in the past now for about 22 years. This is the same Terminator that we see in the beginning of the movie that kills John Connor. And it learns to have a family. It has a wife and a son. It's really interesting concepts for this Terminator, where, I mean, it says it in the movie itself that it doesn't know how to love the way a human being does, but it kind of learns it in its own way, and it has its own family. And we see this Terminator, we're introduced to this Terminator giving beers, giving Corona with lime in it to our main characters. He's wearing a flannel shirt. His name is, I want to say, Carl. He owns a drapery business. You know, this machine is completely acting like a human being, and kind of a dorky one at the same time. He runs a drapery business. He has a van that's his company car that has his drapery logos and stuff on it. And the first scene where it goes into action, he's talking to the main characters about drapes. He's explaining how for a little girl's room you don't want to just put regular colors. You need shapes, and you need rainbows, and you need polka dots and stuff. And it's really, really funny. It comes off as really charming, and it's really silly. And I was laughing. Those were the few moments of real joy that I was getting out of this movie were in those scenes. I would love to just watch a prequel film to this of just that character doing drapes. It was a pleasure to watch him. You can tell he was having fun with it, and he did really, really great in his role. Sadly, his role kind of diminishes into just being a generic Terminator action hero. His action scenes are nowhere near as good as they were in the originals. I don't think that has anything to do with his age. Man is in still really great shape. They're just not written as well. It's not as crafted and detailed and well thought out of action sequences as you have in Terminator 2 or Terminator 1. They just are kind of generic action scenes. They do things that you would expect them to do. And my first feeling of dread for this movie was in the trailer, where I saw that plane crash sequence, because that's the thing. Like I said before, with Terminator movies, you don't need them to ramp up that much. You don't need these gigantic, crazy events to happen. It's about two things duking it out and slamming each other into walls, and that's what makes it exciting and entertaining. I don't need the environment to come crashing down around them. I just need to have fun watching them fight each other. And it's a very just bland experience watching that. He doesn't have a lot of time in the movie, sadly. Again, I applaud them for that, because they're trying to make you like the new characters versus just wanting to see Arnold Schwarzenegger as the Terminator again. But it just doesn't feel right. I don't know how else to say it. It's not what I was hoping to see, and it's not that feeling I got it's not that spectacle that I got when I watched the first two Terminator movies. And again, it's just a shame. But again, fantastic performance by Arnold. I really, really liked watching Arnold in this movie. As far as seeing Sarah Connor again in this movie, played by Linda Hamilton, it was nice to see her at first, but even her, I think they tried to push too far. She's got this kind of grumpy exterior the whole movie, which, I mean, I get her son is murdered in the beginning of the movie, so of course she's going to be different than what we remember. But it just seems like they tried to make her more edge for the sake of having more edge, to make her a tougher character, to make her a stronger female lead. But she already was one. She's been that since the first Terminator movie. She's the archetype for strong female leads in movies. And it's like they didn't already realize that, and they just tried to make her even stronger. And just kind of, if you can imagine a grumpy Harrison Ford in a Terminator movie as a woman, that's kind of how this character played off, but one that swears a lot more. And yeah, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it just still didn't feel like Sarah Connor. So it just came off not feeling as nice. So overall, my score of this movie, I would definitely say, is far worse than Terminator 1 and 2. It's far better than Terminator Genesis. Terminator Salvation, I don't think even counts. It's its own kind of thing. I'm not trying to be negative about that movie, even though it's not a very good movie, but it's its own separate thing. So it's far better than Terminator Genesis. But is it better than Terminator 3? No, I don't think it is. I think it tries a lot harder, and I think it has better ideas. But unfortunately, with its execution, it's not fun to watch. It's just not fun to watch. And ultimately, that's why you go to a movie, especially one like this, is you want it to be fun to watch, and it's not. So I would put this movie below Terminator 3 for sure. On a scale of Terminator Genesis to Terminator 2, I'd give this movie Junior. And that does it for me.